Rob, 10 more seconds. Thanks, Rob. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. I'm Andrew McNichol, the Community Development Director. We're here tonight to discuss a new tool we've been developing for what specifically right now is downtown development in relation to our Section 3A or MBTA Communities Compliance District, which focus a lot on the downtown district. And what we've done is use our remaining grant funding to help advance towards a pattern book, as we're calling it, which really is an evolution of the downtown design guidelines that exist already and are quite technical and jargony and a lot of language based. So what we wanted to do was create a more visual based tool that takes those guidelines and all of the important elements in Reading's history and context and give them visual descriptions and elements so that the public, the boards, the staff, and applicants alike can have another frame of reference in terms of future development styles that we could find appropriate in downtown and potentially even beyond if this pattern book expands. We've been working with Innis Design. I want to acknowledge that this is a hybrid meeting. We are having some Zoom technical difficulties. So if you are on the Zoom and you have any questions either during or after, please try to type them in the chat if you can. If you use the raise hand feature, we will call on you. We're just having audio issues. But otherwise, we should be ready to go. And I'm going to pass it to Innis Design to start a presentation, and then we'll just have a dialogue from there. So thank you all again.
Okay. I apologize. I'm going to have to stand this way so I can actually move the slides. Okay, so there we go. So my name is Supriya Kelkar. I'm from Innis Associates, the second one on the list. I'm a senior planner and urban designer, and we have been working very closely with Andrew and Olivia to develop this pattern book, which is like an extension of how to use zoning and how can the design guidelines be more visual. So today I just want to go through a little bit of the background of why this pattern book came into being, the intent of what this needs to convey, what is it, and why do we need it, and how can people actually use it. And then we can have some Q&A and the next steps for this one. So the goal of this pattern book is to make zoning user-friendly and accessible to people. This document, and I cannot stress on this enough, this document does not change the zoning, does not intend to change the zoning, nor have new design guidelines. This just takes the present information and presents it in a visual way so that the design guidelines and zoning are more easier to understand. People can flip through it and actually have visual cues to understand what to do if they want to develop or have a project in Reading. So we envision this pattern book like a menu. So you start with a blank plate, and then you start filling it up with ingredients to actually make a comprehensive and cohesive dish. That was the idea behind the pattern book. I apologize for that analogy, but this is the simplest way I can explain that. It makes zoning easier to follow, gives clear ideas of what the town wants to see, build and develop here, and then in that way it also ends up matching the community needs because it translates to what the town wants to see. So again, it makes zoning clearer, and again, we all know that a regular resident, zoning is, as Andrew said, extremely jargony. To have the entire zoning document in front of you, it's not really easy to parse through and understand what a resident has to do. So this just makes it clearer. If you can understand zoning, you can have smart growth, you can have growth that the town wants to see. It involves the community because the community can read this document. It helps developers and owners because, again, it translates the town's visions into visual form, and then also improves design quality because this frames the design guidelines. As Andrew said, it helps everyone from residents to property owners to developers, designers, and also town officials when they are making decisions about projects that come through. This is the draft of table of contents that we developed for this pattern book, and I'll go through all of the sections stepwise. This is a draft, so at this point, we need all of your input and understanding to make it better for people to understand. So first phase is just the purpose and applicability and how to use the guide. Then we provide a context of the town of Reading, how it was developed, what architectural styles came into being, what the old buildings look like, where the historic districts are, what buildings are on the historic registry, why they are important. And then as section A, we took the downtown smart growth district as an example and expanded on downtown's history. This is labeled section A, and I'll come up to this point later again, but this goes to the point of this book can be expanded later on. It doesn't need to be a stagnant document. Then we go to the step-by-step process. So allowed uses, dimensional requirements, everything that the zoning usually regulates regarding development. And then how do you place on site? This is where the design guidelines and development standards fold into this book. So now how to use the guide. This is that window blocks a little bit, but how to use the guide. So step one is understanding the district characteristics. So where are you placing whatever you're developing? And then identifying what is being added or built. So what uses are allowed, and are you adding or building, or do you have accessory uses? And then reviewing the dimensional requirements. So that creates like a mass that you can build on the specific site. And then you have a palette of architectural style options that the town deems to be suitable or which will fit into the character of the town. And then you ensure the compliance with the building components. So what can you add, what elements can you add to the building to make it suit the environment? And then we talk about the site placement and development. So we go through every step from choosing what use you want, and then in the end placing it in the neighborhood. So then we talk about the district characteristics. Again, section A is just DSGD. That's what we are expanding on in the book right now, but I just highlighted point B, point C, that more districts and more areas as the town wants can be expanded in the book. Stepwise process. So we took an example of allowed uses just for the downtown. So in downtown, you can't have commercial in isolation. So this just gives visual cues to commercial is not allowed or residential is encouraged, but both a mixed use is allowed and encouraged. So just simple diagrams and visual cues to help people understand what the uses are and how they would compile together.
Can you just tell me, what is that, where it's blocked by Amanda, what does that top one say?
Oh, that's residential, which is in isolation, which is allowed, and then commercial use in isolation is not allowed.
Thank you.
But this is what the town would love to see.
Thank you.
This brings up to dimensional requirements, so just FAR and height and lot frontage, how the density looks like, and then setbacks and side yards. It's just a little sketch we made of how do you actually place a use on the site, and how do you go about it. So you will see when I go through this, you will see that we don't actually put numbers on what the FAR is, what the side setbacks are, because the idea of the book is to explain what those concepts mean, not actually provide numbers, because we don't want to reiterate zoning and design guidelines entirely in this document. We still want people to refer back to the actual regulations, but this just informs them what requirements do they need to fulfill to build something in the town, and what does it actually mean. So just sample diagrams showing FAR and what it means and how it translates into different lot coverages. So height can sometimes be tricky, because a lot of times a residential building 2 floors versus a mixed-use building 2 floors, architecturally they look very different, but in this is a first draft of the visual that we are working on, but just goes to show that even if the height is not that different, just architectural language can create a very different impact of what these different uses look like. So just explaining the difference of height, how they fit together, and what it means to be 3 floors, 2 floors, 1 story. Lot front just talks about just what a straight lot means, what a corner lot means, what the frontages mean. If your frontage is just on the primary street, even if you're on a corner lot, what does that entail? How much should it be? And then side setbacks. So we go through what a minimum front setback needs to be, what a minimum and maximum sides needs to be, and then what the side setback. So it basically starts cutting through and giving you the small portion that you can actually use of your plot. So it just goes to explain all of these concepts visually. So once you have a building mass with all the dimensional requirement, we move on to architectural style options. So we reviewed the prevalent architectural styles in town of Reading. These were the 10 that we thought we see most often, and this is where we would need your input. If anything is missing, if anything needs to be removed, is not really suitable here, we would love to know your opinion. So I just highlighted colonial New England and federal New England for this one, because what we aim to do is we aim to show a simple 3D and 2D of a colonial New England, what it looks like, what the key elements are, and then what it looks like when it moves on to modern contemporary. So just examples of visuals. A simple 3D visual, and then a visual that has actually been constructed in a modern contemporary way. So people can identify these features in today's construction as well. So we just did colonial and federal for this one. So federal has 2 chimneys, has a fan light over the door, some simple key elements such as that. That brings us to building components. Now, one of the things that we really want your input in is we made a huge list of a library of building components. Now, the key part is how do we advise developers or residents to pick suitable elements out of this and not have, because you can choose 6 or 7 of this, which doesn't actually translate well visually. So the idea is how do you incorporate a few of these elements into your projects, but also make them like a contemporary version of the traditional architectural style. That is the question that we are still discussing. We would love your input on this one. And again, if any elements are missing, we would love to add more. If anything doesn't seem that suitable, we can have discussion on that. Now this brings us to placing on site. This is our, well, as you can see, least developed portion of the book right now. But the idea is that we don't want to dictate how to do, we don't want to give a prepared project, but what we want to do is create scenarios that if you have a mixed use on a corner lot, or if you have a residential lot, a simple residential lot, rectangular, if you have mixed use on an irregular lot, we want to do a fit study with all of the steps that we just did, and then bring forth the development standard and design guidelines in this. I highlighted some of the key portions like massing and step backs and sideways and driveways. The design guidelines that Reading has are exceptionally great. What we want to do is highlight these few elements and how we use them to place the fit study on the parcel, which informs the people that if you want to look into this more, refer back to the design guidelines. So that just gives a more thorough language, but this just shows how they can be used on an actual plot of land. That is all I have for today, actually. Any questions? Something I can go back on?
Well, just to back up a little bit, and
Yes.
perhaps I should apologize if I express ignorance about the process. Who actually is this document intended to be for, and what is the purposes for which it will be used? Either you or Andrew or...
So it is for developers and applicants to understand the context in which we're hoping that their applications and project get towards, but just like the design guidelines as a tool for Cpdc and the public to say, how are you meeting these certain elements, or are you requesting a waiver from these certain sections, and if so, why? So it's taken the design guidelines one step further to say, this is what we're looking for, how are you incorporating it? Because I do think, right, in the design guideline language, it focuses a lot on the technical resources of step backs and so on at the fourth floor level, but now visually, what does that look like? And if you're looking for relief from that, here's what we'd want to see instead on, say, a flat facade, but with ornamental treatment or something like that, or a roof design that breaks up the facade more so than a step back. And so it starts at the applicant, though, in terms of how they use it to inform their project.
Okay, thank you. So, anybody else jump in here? So it's intended then, if somebody is seeking to develop in the downtown smart growth district or in the MBTA, basically, areas, they're going to be directed to the design guidelines and to this pattern book.
Correct.
Yes.
So, and again, forgive my ignorance, I probably should have asked this question a long, long time ago in many of our other conversations. My understanding was that the design guidelines were, if I remember correctly, initially drafted around the downtown smart growth district bylaw. Is that correct?
Yes.
And my initial question then is, do the downtown smart growth district design guidelines and this document apply? I take it the answer is that they do apply to both the development in the downtown smart growth district as well as development under the MBTA Communities Act.
Yes, because for MBTA Communities Act, we used the smart growth district and we did upzone it to a degree in a manageable way, but the 3A compliance district and the DSGD downtown smart growth district are one and the same in this case.
Right.
So.
Okay.
Are you bringing this to zoning or the building inspector commissioner? Because I'm looking, from my experience on the board, there's like a few visual things that like steps without an awning or, balconies, like how does that relate to the zoning? And is there like a place where that can be kind of like nipped or noted or footnoted or something? Because like, as an example, like that's just bringing like corner lots, like what is that, you are showing a setback, but I know that in the past, the zoning wasn't very clear on what the setback is on a corner lot, like is it a side or is it a front? So I'm wondering if there's like a way in the visual or something where you can footnote and like.
Yeah, that is a good thought that we should bring it to the building commissioner and zoning interpreter because of things like, can an awning extend past the front setback or into a public right-of-way? Or if a building steps out at the roof level, what does that mean for setback? So that's a good point, and we will do that.
You all set for that, Amy?
Yeah.
Real basic question.
Yes.
With respect to a lot of the slides that I saw, this is a real simple question. I assume the answer is yes, but you had a lot of information on a lot of those slides with a lot of pictures of things.
Yes.
And I'm not real good at a real quick look at something and figuring it out. So I wonder if we could get copies of this
Yes,
stuff.
yes,
But the question I was going to ask was, are you listed like 1 through 5 or A, B, C, D, and then I noticed on the pictures there was no 1 through 5 or A, B, C, D.
Yeah. Yes.
That was really challenging for me, and I take it because this is a draft, that's going to change.
Yes, I mean, we are developing the draft of the pattern book side by side, so in that it lays out better than this, I promise. It will be numbered, it will have images of actual, how it looks like in real life, and a 3D to go with it, and a definition of what it means.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we've seen at CPDC, we saw a few, like a little bit more of the book a week or a couple weeks ago. So, right, I think this was more of like a visual, this is what it could be, and it's not like one-to-one relationship.
Okay. The thing, Andrew, you know this, what I'm going to focus on, and I don't, whatever other people should be want to talk about. My main interest, it's all of it, particularly the design, and I am so gratified to finally see architectural design elements associated with it, because it has driven me crazy, as you know. And my my perspective is that it might have driven CPDC crazy at the time that they were seeking to apply to a particular project, particular design features or elements, or a design that they wanted to see, because that was not anywhere in existence in the design guidelines or anywhere else. And my sense was that, and it still is that CPDC is not comfortable or not willing, and I know you're partially going to say that they don't necessarily have the authority to reject a particular proposal or require that a particular proposal look architecturally a particular way. And I have always advocated, including when I was on the CPDC, which is probably before you were born, that CPDC should, that we should have the capability to require more in terms of design features, design elements, and actual architectural design, and where a developer is unwilling, unless I know because of the whole economic discussion that it may get into that. But other than that, I feel very strongly that CPDC should be able to, any permitting authority should be able to either require that, and in the alternative, if the developer isn't prepared or willing to conform to that design, to reject the plan for that reason, because it doesn't architecturally match. So I now have the sense that none of those requirements or conditions are part of the pattern book, so I can probably shut up, and I've worked very hard and long to try to get it in the design guidelines, but that's what I'm really interested in seeing and affording CPDC the ability and the authority to do.
But what could, so I'm not going to speak about this being actually used as a rule or regulation book, but what it can do is if you don't like what a developer is bringing forth, this pattern book can be something that you keep in front of him and show that, hey, these are the examples that, have you considered this? Can this work? So this just gives more ideas of what is acceptable to Reading and can be used as an idea book to go back and forth between designs that you want to make more acceptable. This might not give the permitting authority, but just as a topic of discussion, this can bring forward designs.
Right, and what we can't do is like require, say, masonry on a facade. They can't hard and fast say your building has to be 100% masonry, and I can't, or CPDC or anyone in town can't hard require that this lot has to be a Victorian style versus a colonial style. And so that's where you get into the challenges of there are all these different options available to you in this menu, what fits the context of this specific lot and this specific use and scale. And I think the challenge we've seen too is like a lot of times like mixed use development is generally 3/1 and it's 4-story, 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 and there are typical development trends too in modern development of efficient square. How do you break that up a little bit in a unique and interesting way that adds to the neighborhood and the downtown district beyond the next development or the one before it? So that is the challenge though.
Okay. Well, to that point, and I don't want to belabor the point because I want to open it up to whatever everybody else wants to talk about, but to that point, Andrew, I have always felt that, I'm not sure I understand why certain things can't be required in the vein that you were saying. I mean, I truly, not I believe, I know that in the regulations, in 40R bylaw, in the 40R law, in the 40R regulations, in the site plan, in all of these documents, they all talk about the purpose and in many other areas, and I can point them out because I have them all here and I know I have previously, where it talks about that designs, buildings need to integrate and conform and complement the neighboring properties, the existing community. So I just don't understand why that can't be relied on anymore to say that maybe you can't require masonry, but this does not integrate with what we have here. It's not consistent with or conforms with New England-style architecture, and if you don't come up with something that will, then we're going to reject it. That's all I'm going to say. And wherever I get the opportunity, I'm going to, obviously, it's not necessarily in the pattern book, and I
Yes.
appreciate that, but I really feel strongly that there ought to be more of that. Thank you.
Stop me if I'm saying something controversial, but the thing is that design is subjective. So if someone is building their own home, it needs to be something that they like what they're looking at. But what this does is just gives them a list of things that is acceptable to the town. Unless someone is building, I don't know, a bright red or something absolutely, again, subjectively garish building. But this just makes it suitable. They can pick the elements that kind of match with the town, but again, can't really dictate what it needs to be, but just gives an idea of these all are acceptable to the town.
And I do understand that issue and that distinction. I guess the only sort of rebuttal that I would, and I agree, and I recognize that. However, I would just respond by saying that if you look at the McDonald's in one town and you look at the McDonald's in, I'm making it up, Concord, it may not be the case, or Williamsburg, Virginia, or Alexandria, it looks very, very different.
Yes.
My belief is that there, I'm sure there is back and forth between whoever the planning or development agency is there to get that to conform more to a certain look. And I guess all I'm suggesting is however much more we can get to there is where I would like us to be.
Yeah, and I think that is where the waiver process has been used by Cpdc to say what is significant about the design of your building, how are you working, like on Gould Street with you guys, to incorporate this into the building design and justify what is an intensity waiver, and it is public benefit trade-off that we seek in specifically a density waiver. Postmark preserved the national, had a historic preservation on it, but that was the preservation of a national historic resource and reuse it, and so that helped to, at least in terms of costs, like you mentioned before, that the developer could say, I'm going to absorb this cost, but I need the density waiver to make the project work.
Right.
So,
Right. This does go a long way to that. I mean, this is fantastic. It really,
Thank you.
really is fantastic. On the other hand, if it isn't enforceable, then it gets diluted a little bit, and I guess that's the bottom line.
yeah, heard.
And what is the timeline for this to go on, become?
Hopeful by the spring that this is finished. We'll keep sharing drafts along the way to Cpdc and probably to you guys as well in the historic committee. We'll provide all the info tonight and everything. And the most recent draft, I think we're designing a tool, if not already built, for you to specifically comment on. And
It's already built.
Yes.
I have survey forms for everyone, and
Perfect.
I will send you the link so you can forward that.
yeah, so we'll forward a link of what's called the Miro board, but it's just an online version of how the book will lay out, and then you can comment on specific sections or details and say this might work better, we're looking for this language, etc.
Great. Thank you.
That's exciting. And then something that makes, speaking to what you were saying about it not being enforceable, is maybe we should have a regular review, like every 5 years, you have to like make sure that it matches what is coming through, right? Because tastes change as the years go on, and what concerns me is we're putting a lot of effort and you're doing like a lot of work, and then what happens? Like you forget about it, it goes on the shelf, it goes wherever.
Yep.
So just thinking about how that, once this is done, what's the next step? Like, it's not just a static.
Agreed. It's the question of like how we are able to either expand to Main Street and update design guidelines there, or if we ever do change the downtown design guidelines, how does that impact this, and how quickly can we make that change?
Nothing.
Right.
This is very exciting.
Yeah, we'll forward everything
Great,
along
great.
in that link, probably by tomorrow, end of the week.
Yes.
So.
And are you okay with, since it isn't drafted, my sharing it with the historical commission?
Yeah, I'll send it to everybody, yeah.
Got one hand from Tony. Let's see. Go ahead, Tony.
Let's see if I'm unmuted quick.
Let's see. You're a little quiet, but I can reiterate your question if the room can't hear it.
The reason, the only thing I wanted to say is that I like the presentation, but I think the consultant needs to reread our dimensional controls. I noticed that height definition did not meet ours when dealing with the residential. So that yes, the three-story building was at flat roof, that's where it qualified, but the heights of two-and-a-half-story buildings were listed as the makeup of the roof line instead of halfway down.
Okay, so concerns about height representation of buildings in the design guidelines, is that accurate?
Yeah, I saw that too. Because,
Make sure that the design guidelines meet our dimensional controls.
Good point.
yeah, because we don't measure our height of our buildings on an angled roof
Right.
by the top or the bottom, it's like the middle.
Yeah, and it is at times based on average grade too, so heights can
Yeah.
kind of.
And we also discussed adding asterisks to setbacks if it's next to your residential or business or.
Yeah, it is the other unique and somewhat challenging part of the zoning to a visual way of like the zoning that states if you're next to a single family or two, your setback is increased to X foot, and so how we visually show that is.
Right, and maybe adding a reference, like this is, this part of the zoning is helpful for people to know that they can't just use the one and not the other.
Right.
That is another reason that we are going to stay away from adding numbers to setbacks, because you need to read the regulations to actually use
Right.
this.
And the regulations can be updated
Right.
Yes.
separately.
Independently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll step into the quicksand here because I know nothing about really in terms of CPDC and all this and zoning and all that. But I think I noticed one thing that's always concerned me is garage doors.
Okay.
They didn't seem to be one of your building components. I didn't see any garage doors on anything. And to me, they present a massive problem on the look of the building, the use of the building, especially if somebody's allowed to put them in, therefore they're allowed to put more people in, and therefore they need more parking. You know, this is not a single cut and dry, stick that building in there. Especially when I'm more, and I did run a construction business for a small period of time, just 11 years, but I got out of it when contractors, you said, oh, this is a Victorian, and you see a colonial building with a tower on it and colored windows and all that, they're all over the place.
Oh my God.
Building components don't necessarily all fit together
Yes.
as one style.
Which is why we are providing a lot of building components. The core question or thing we need to discuss is how do you pick and choose the components wisely that work for that specific project that you're working on?
Yeah,
And-
but then it really just becomes somebody's choice and other people's going along with it, not going along with it. I think specifically of, we had a building inspector here, you needed a certain amount of frontage, and so he would divide the lot and make it 30 degrees here and 20 degrees here, and oh, now we've got enough room to squeeze that, but the two garage doors are facing right on the part of our historic district, you know? Things affect other things later. I just don't know how this all blends together to make it what it needs to be for downtown. Downtown is, obviously, there's Art Deco downtown, and there's all sorts of different other characteristics, and how, I don't know how you mix them, but I'll leave that to somebody else. But I do know the garage doors really
We will add that component in the list.
bug me.
Andrew, when you I know it's very, very different in terms of development, property development, as compared to what we do on the commission with respect to property owners, or maybe oftentimes developers anyway. But do you provide the design guidelines, and will you provide the pattern book to every project? So whenever somebody comes in to develop a project, my concern is what we've experienced oftentimes on the Historical Commission is that we will identify in the application our regulations, which require certain things that may not be in the bylaw, and encourage developers or whoever to read that, but they don't necessarily always do that. So when they come in with their design, it doesn't conform to what our requirements are. Are people going to be given, when applicants come in for a particular project, are they going to be, I know you can't require people to read it, but are they going to be given it and say that this is what we require in this town, or this is what our guidelines are, however you want to call it, but take this and read it before you submit your application?
Yeah, so we'll always give it to them
You can ask them to read it, but they don't always do.
Well, we were actually talking about, because I know everything is online now, and, talking about having them check off where they actually have read it, which I know also, that doesn't mean they necessarily have, but it's a real problem, and particularly as you're trying to get them to this point. I mean, once if they haven't, and they've come up with a particular design or proposal independent of that, by the time they submit it to you and you ask them to take a look at the pattern book of the guidelines, you're already at odds with them. So the earlier you can get them to do it is better.
Yeah, we do always get it to them as early in the process as practical. Some will come to us before their full application and say, here's what we're thinking of doing, are we on the right track? And that's a good opportunity. Some just fully submit out of the blue and have their design plans ready, but we'll give it to them then. But then throughout the public hearing process, in every 40-yard decision, you will see every section of the design guidelines referenced and explaining how they are met or not. And that's generally on staff to review and comment on how that's happening. But in most senses, I think there's generally a few waiver requests from the design guidelines, whether that's blank facades or a step back being maybe a little less than 5 feet or something. And so we're always flagging those in terms of what they are and why they're being proposed as waivers.
Okay, thank you.
From the point of view of the Historic Commission, what percentage of your projects are individuals versus developers?
That's a great question. I'd just be hazarding a guess, but most of them lately have been developers.
Okay.
They want to tear down a building and put up tear down a house and put up a huge building.
I'm on my Historic District Commission in Haverhill, in our area of Haverhill, and it's single-family homes for the most part. But people, especially newcomers, they just want to for us to tell them the list of things we're going to approve. Can you just just tell me what windows to buy? Tell me what you're going to approve. So that's why I was asking the breakdown. That's not for the Historic District Commission to say.
Right.
Bring us your projects. Here are the types of things we've done. Here are some that have been approved in the past. However, if your house is a 1760s house, those are 2 over 2, not 6 over 8 or 8 over 10 or whatever. Just because there's that. Those are one of the largest visual components of what gets approved or doesn't. One has to be historically appropriate, not accurate but appropriate. So that's what I was asking about. Is it the breakdown between developers? It's a whole different ball of wax, I think, for developers when coming in and they want to tear down. So that's. I think this is a great tool. Gets significantly closer to your goal, which may never get all the way there, but I think this gets a lot closer in terms of them being able to have something tangible. The question is getting them to slow down and digest it, which is, they're not wanted to do.
Exactly.
Just as a side reference, I'm on the Historic District Commission in Reading, and I understand your comment.
For us, it's mostly neighbor on neighbor, and we all try to one hand washes the other, trying to make it work. It's not nearly as not nearly as big a deal as it is when you're doing a whole building in a downtown area. So.
Well, the thing I find with contractors, they come in, this is my project.
Yeah.
And they've expanded it, they've done what they want to do, they've got it to the height, even the Metro building, which is a 4-story building, but it's not looked at as a 4-story building because it's a 3 on top of a 1. That's, to me, that's stupid. It's a 4-story building, and I don't know how the fire department looks at that, but because the first layer is cinder block and meant for parking, and the rest is wood, it makes them entirely different in the state size. But the contractor comes in and people have to push and push and push to get, well, my major complaint was the original building was built on the line. And then the roof was extended out 3 feet at the eave. And I say, well, that's going to decrease our population very nicely from the 180 people that walk past my doorstep every morning, because that snowdrop, that ice drop was going to be right in the middle of the sidewalk. And it took a lot of work to convince anybody that you had to push it back 10 or 15 feet. And we finally were able to do at least that. But
Well, out of curiosity, Everett, I was always viewing this as part of Downtown Smart Growth District or the MBTA, but is this intended to apply to residents in historic districts who have an interest in a project at their house? Is this intended for that purpose, so that those people who are residents, who are making changes to their house, which is in the historic district, will they be directed to this document to get a sense as to what is not necessarily
Not in
required?
its current iteration, probably, although there might be some key context points that maybe they can pull from it, but the intent is to set it up that it could expand to Main Street, that it could
Yeah.
expand to accessory dwelling units or historic districts. There are costs associated with that to pay someone as talented as Supriya to continue building it, but yes, that is the intent, that if there's intention to expand in funding resources and grants to do it, that we can try to pursue those.
And to the accessory dwelling units, the city of Boston is already working on their own visual guidelines. They're exempt from the ADU law, but it's interesting to see that it's a trend, I think,
Yeah.
of this visual, representation of what.
I think
I
it
thought
is.
Jonathan was trying to get me to draw a book. I don't draw that well.
That's photographs, though.
You might be a little cheaper than Supriya if you're interested.
Oh, he's a lot cheaper.
And not unlike the downtown area, our historic districts have a wide scope, especially the West Street. We have buildings from basically 1728, I guess is probably the earliest, up until 1970, And by the way, the 1970s buildings are the ones that are having the failing windows.
I'm sure.
And they have already been replaced once.
Yeah. Well, the 70s were
I
rough for.
think, coming back to your trend, I think that's the whole point, that people are not reading the document, so this might actually, the visual, the less text we can incorporate in the document, at least people will flip through if not read the text, and that will give enough information.
And what I find is that when you see the visual, then if that number is there, then you go back and you read and you're like, but I'm close. How can I make it work?
And for your question that you were asking, Andrew, what we are starting the district characteristic is with providing an overview of Reading and providing a map of what the historic districts are, where the key properties are. So if someone is developing that, at least they're aware of what the history of that area is, and then they can move on from
Yeah,
there.
I did see that, and that's great.
Very exciting.
Yeah, that's great. Good job.
So this scan code, you're going to provide this for a link? Because can't really do it on my phone. That's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll follow up, we'll share the slides and the link for the comment board.
My brother's
Give
name
that
is
a few
December.
weeks of opening, and hopefully by then you guys can take a bit of time.
Really?
Also, give me a day to think about it and look at it a bit more.
Well, actually, both.
So yeah, we'll do all that, and
My middle
as we
name is
close out the
Office, so I'm
document,
an
we'll
old
share it along the way as well. So
His is Osborne.
Thanks very much.
thank you guys. Thank you for
Thank
bearing
you.
with us through
Thank you.
technical
Do we have a
difficulties.
sign-in sheet so we'll get a draft sent to us or something, or?
I'll send you a draft.
He knows
My
this.
district put me here.
Only too well.
Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
Memorize the attendees.
Oh, I just,
They say in Casablanca, the usual suspects. Right?
Yeah, right, yeah. So,
Round up.
Thank you.
yeah.
We're looking forward to your comments.
What a nightmare. Zoom button.